Our first session today is entitled Communities Moving to Recovery, What We Learned from a Crisis. Our panel consists of Councillor Laurey-Anne Roodenburg, Quesnel, Mayor Sarrah Storey, Fraser Lake, Mayor Lynn Hall, Prince George, and Area Director Al Richmond from the Cariboo Regional District. They will be talking about what they believe helped them and their communities emerge from crises stronger than ever. Our moderator today is Nicola Marotz, Strategic Advisor to Local Government from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and representative on the LGLA board. The panel will be here for Q&A after the discussion, so please put your questions in the question feed, and as we go along, give fellow delegates the chance to upvote popular questions early. Here we go. Welcome everyone to the session on Moving to Recovery, What We Have Learned from a Crisis. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel. Mayor Sarrah Storey from Fraser Lake, Councillor Laurey-Anne Roodenburg from the City of Quesnel, Mayor Lynn Hall from Prince George, and Electoral Area Director Al Richmond from the Cariboo Regional District. Moderating our discussion today is Nicola Marotz, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs representative on the board of the Local Government Leadership Academy. Over to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Gabby. I'm so pleased to be moderating this panel. The COVID-19 pandemic is obviously an incredibly intensive, unprecedented crisis that has impacted and still is impacting BC communities, the province, the country, the world, each of us individually in ways we couldn't even imagine a year ago. But it is by no means the first crisis that communities in BC have faced or are still facing. And crises come in many forms: natural disasters, sudden economic loss, a health and social crisis such as opioid overdoses or COVID. And in all of them, local government elected officials have to deal with the impacts and help put their communities on the path to recovery. So today, these leaders are here to generously share some of their experiences and thoughts to help other local elected officials. The hope is that this discussion can help you reflect on and prepare for the unexpected. So with that, I think we'll jump right into the panel and get started. So Al, if I can turn to you first, I'm wondering if you can tell us about a crisis you've been through or are going through with your community and why that experience has been eye-opening for you.
Well, thank you, Nicola, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here today to address this group and try and share some of my experiences, and I think the panel here has got some great experiences that they can share. In my case, I think of two instances. One was the Mount Polley breach and what we learned from that and the eye-opening things you're talking about. I recall very well getting the call in 2014, the wee hours of the morning, and just to set stage, I was at my cabin at the lake and I had family come up and I was sleeping in the trailer to give them the room in the cabin. And I fortunately had taken the phone with me. So when the phone rang, I had to run close to the cabin, standing out in my shorts in the middle of the lawn trying to have a conversation. And it was our EOC director who had said there had been a breach at the Mount Polley tailings pond and would I be supportive of them sending a helicopter up to do some filming. And I thought it was a reasonable request. And so at first light, they were going to send a helicopter up to record what's going on. Now, it may seem like it's a reasonable thing to do, but that decision, that recommendation from our EOC director, turned out that they used that video footage in their investigations in the ongoing months that ensued. But I think when she told me it was a minor breach, I had one thing in mind. And when I saw the video, I found out that it wasn't a minor breach as what I would define that to be. And that was the eye opener, which was what you may be told is not what you're told may not be what is actually happening. And that was a bit of a surprise for us. And I think as the province watched after that, we found out it was much bigger than we originally envisioned. The second thing I think was the fires of 2017, and those fires consumed the province and the media for about 2 months. We were running longer than that, but 2 months of intense things. involving many communities, Prince George and all the way down to the island and all the communities that came in to help us. But hundreds of evacuation alerts were issued and orders, and people were told to leave their communities. And as local governments, we take our direction from senior officials, other organizations, to what needed to be done. And I think what we learned from that, the eye-opener, was that once we've asked people to leave their homes, we need to push back to these organizations to ensure they understand the necessity of getting people home quickly. And so the eye-opener for me was that quite often these organizations forget, once they've got people out and they can do their operations, that we need to get people home. So those are just a couple of eye-openers I had. What you're told at the beginning may not be what is, and you got to remember from someone else's point of view, the getting people back home and resuming normal operations may not be on their list of things to do, and it should be on ours. So that's just two short things. Perhaps that covers it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Al. Sarrah, can I ask you the same question? If you can think about a crisis that you've gone through with your community, and what did you find eye-opening in that process?
Sure. Thanks, Nicola. So Fraser Lake has, I think, been in the news a fair share amount lately. I think everybody knows that we've gone through our fair share of crises. First, the Endako mine closed in 2014. At the end of 2014 in December, right before Christmas, everybody found out. We've had multiple impactful fire seasons in 2017 and 2018 and 2019, including having the largest fires in BC surrounding us in that 2018 year when I was acting mayor. And I was going back to Al's imagery of what he was doing when Mount Polly broke. I was on a rock hunting trip at Dekaisi Lake where there's no Wi-Fi, no cell service. And all of a sudden we got a little cell service and my phone went ding, 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 and didn't stop for about 2 minutes because the fire had traveled so many kilometers in one night. So we had all of these things happen, including curtailments with West Fraser sawmills in 2018 and 2020, and now COVID. And while I could talk about them all, I'm really going to focus on the loss of industry in community. So at the end of 2014, like I said, Endako mine closed after 42 years. So it went on, care and maintenance. It had an estimated 18 years left in its mine life, and we lost over 350 jobs in the community of about 1,200 people at that time. So many families that lived here for years moved or had to take camp jobs, which I assure you impacts the community greatly, whether it's with volunteers or sports teams, only having half the members with each shift change, including my husband, for instance. I'm on the slow pitch team, and all of a sudden you only have half of the community at any given event. So you really can't do a whole lot when half the community is missing. It just changed everything from family dynamics to restaurants and businesses seeing less and less people. And that impacts the stores. And, then we started seeing things close because they can't stay afloat. So typically what people were doing, we're driving 2 hours to Prince George to find what they need, which is great for Prince George, but definitely impacts the local shopping. Because if you go to Prince George, as people know, you probably just buy it all because it's just easier to do that. So it really impacted the way we did business and what we had to do. When the mine closed, then businesses started to close, including the grocery store in 2016. We lost our only grocery store. And then CIBC, the only bank, closed in September of 2019. So that was a domino effect, and house prices dropped. We had less kids in the school system and could not fill youth sports teams. There was a lack of employment. And worse was the sense that the community was dying. The entire thing was eye-opening as we relied on industry to save us and keep us afloat for the entire existence of the community. We now had to diversify and find a new way. I became mayor at probably the worst time in Fraser Lake's economic status, but we have done in the last 2 years has been probably more than we've done in 10, just by the sheer fact that we had to do something different. And thanks to the hard work by many, we've overcome a lot.
Right. Wow. Thank you for that, Sarrah. That was a devastating situation. The fires that Al talked about, the fires you talked about, and then the economic loss. Lynn, I'm wondering if we can hear from you about something that was eye-opening for you as you went through a crisis with your community.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. And I'll carry on talking about the 2017 wildfires. That was a huge impact for Prince George on a couple of fronts. One is that we had taken in about 10,000 evacuees from various locations, and many of them from the group that's representing various areas of the north here today came from their communities. So 10,000 evacuees came in, but not only that, Nicola, we were also looking over our shoulder about how do we protect our city from a wildfire impacting us. So it was a twofold crisis at the time, though our primary focus for a very long time, probably up to 100 days, was around making sure the evacuees had the services they needed. So within that was a great deal of coordination. We talk about coordination with health services, social services, transportation, accommodation. All of that was part and parcel of what we were trying to offer. And our real mantra was, if you're coming to Prince George, we're going to try to provide the services that you're used to at home. And the only difference is that you're not in your own house. So it was about campgrounds. It was about hotels. How do we set up emergency services at an emergency evacuation center in our college and our university? So we really took over most of the city. And it was an opportunity, I think, for us to learn from, obviously, because we had also been working very closely and with those partners on an evacuation plan for Prince George, no matter what crisis occurred. And, you know, I look back on 2017, and unfortunately, it laid the groundwork for what we're going through now with the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think we were in a little better position from an emergency operations perspective to be able to at least implement some of the orders or all of the orders that we were receiving from Dr. Henry. And then when government posted the provincial emergency status, we were in a little better position. We continue to look back on 2017 and the impact it's had, and we carry over now into not just the pandemic that we're dealing with, but also the opioid crisis is huge for us. We're the largest community north of Kamloops. We are in the center of the province, and we provide hub services to all of the locations in the area, in the North Central Local Government Association area. And we're proud to do that and prepared to do that. It does strain the system, but when we look at the opioid crisis, what comes with that is homelessness issues. What comes with that is mental illness issues. So we've really gone from 2017 and got out of that to some flooding that we have every year here in Prince George to deal with that crisis, on to dealing with the opioid crisis and the pandemic. So we really find, and I think if I can boil it down to three things, Nicola, it's really communication, partnerships, and coordination. And we're really focused on those three items when we talk about any crisis that we're facing in the city.
Great, thank you for that. Really appreciate hearing about that. And lastly, but certainly not least, Laurey-Anne, what was eye-opening for you in a crisis that you've gone through with your community?
Thank you, Nicola. And I appreciate being part of this panel. You'll find that a lot of what the my previous colleagues have spoken to have actually impacted Quesnel. We talk about the floods. We've had fires from 2017. We've had all of these really, we're not new to emergency responses because of what's happened. We've also, had mill closures that have affected us economically and with our workforce. So what I'm going to talk about is COVID, actually, because what happened after some of those events, what we found in our community was there was money available for businesses and, different groups throughout the community, but they didn't know how to access it, or they didn't think they were worthy of accessing it because of where it was coming from. So in March of 2020, COVID pretty much shut down BC, and so Quesnel was thrown into an emergency response scenario. So what we did, the city was able to pull together what was called a business support team in record time. And this team included staff from the Community Futures of North Caribou, District Chamber of Commerce, our 3 BIAs, the Cariboo Regional District, and the District of Wells. And so we recognized that it was important to work together to make sure that we weren't trying to do the same things and to support the business community. So this team was organized and put together in mid-March to address COVID-19 and their effects on small businesses in the Quesnel area. And they quickly defined 2 key goals: to maximize the number of businesses that were able to access COVID-19 financial supports, and maximize local spending to ensure cash flow throughout the community. From their areas of action were figured out, and staff from each group committed to volunteer time and or finances to 2 different programs. So first of all, they created the business hotline. And so what that was that the volunteers sat down and they were given lists of businesses through our business license program to call and make sure that each of them were contacted and told about all the various programs that were available. We didn't wait for them to call us and say, can you help us with this program or what's available? We each had a list every day for a couple hours. We sit down and we would call these businesses, and they ranged from the small independent home business that did daycare to our industry leaders around forestry, et cetera. And so what happened was we touched base with them and just let them know of all the programs that were available. And if they needed support in applying for them, we had that in place at the Community Futures office. And that office has stayed open since, or that particular position has stayed open, so that throughout the entire time, right up until now, businesses can call and find out what's going on. The second initiative was communications and social media, because we found that a lot of our businesses weren't that savvy when it came to social media. And so we really focused on the Love Quesnel channel that we have and promoted local businesses through the NDI Trust Love Northern BC program. And so by doing all of this, we had a series of campaigns that were developed, and we had 28 days of giveaways where every day a $100 gift card from various businesses throughout the 3 BIAs was awarded. And we had the best ever engagement on our social media Love Quesnel piece. So the teams were already able to build into other platforms such as the Support Local BC, where they were selling gift cards to various Quesnel-based businesses, and the Thought Exchange that kind of was a platform where you gathered data around trying to get the temperature of small businesses in the area. So what we found was that what I found was that people were really appreciative of the fact that you called them. When you called a small home-based daycare provider and they're going, oh, I actually eligible for that program? I didn't know that. And so we were able to make those phone calls. And then after that entire list was called, we called them back again to make sure that they had done their application or if they still needed help. And we actually now have another person who is back at it, making sure that she's available for these businesses because programs have been changing. And we've seen a lot of success in our program. So that's that's how we've managed to deal with our pandemic here in Quesnel.
Right. Thank you, Laurey-Anne. And thanks to all of you for kind of putting your stories on the table. That's some pretty dramatic experiences that you've gone through. And I'm going to be interested in a minute and just hearing more from you about some of the top 2 or 3 things that you think you and your community learned about going through this crisis. But I'm kind of intrigued when you're in the middle of something that's as dramatic as what you've gone through with your communities. Are there moments that you'd like to have back? Were there any do-over moments for you in the crisis? Something you'd like to rethink or redo how you approached it? Sarrah, I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe I can ask you to reflect on that a bit.
Sure. There was a few do-over moments, I'm sure, but when we went from 350 full-time positions to care and maintenance with just 9 positions, you know, there was a lot that was going on behind the scenes. I was working on workers' transitions with Work BC at that moment just to help out. I wasn't even on council yet, but looking back on what happened and what transpired, I think we really could have done a better job. You know, making more noise in the media and making more noise with the provincial government. You know, I look back and I see, you know, sawmills closing, or we've had a few really bad incidences, you know, in our area with Babine sawmills exploding. And, you know, there's some bad things that have happened. And when these bad things happen and impact your community, you really have to be vocal. You really have to get out there and look for more supports in place. When we lost over $1 million in annual tax revenue to a community of 1,200, excuse me, it's really devastating. It's devastating to lose. We're a small community. That impacted us so greatly. And I really do believe that the squeaky wheel typically does get the oil, and a mayor and council that advocate well seem to do better and have more access to supports, which greatly reduces stress and it benefits the residents and the surrounding area.
Right. Al, any redos for you?
Well, to redo for myself, there's a number of them, as Sarah indicated. There's probably many things you'd redo or restart or rejig. But I think when you're talking about leaders and people who are faced with helping their community, and this goes not just to the chairs of the mayors, it goes down to the people who are councillors and directors. Make sure you get rest. I think that, you know, our ELC was open for 70 days and we went pretty hard for over 60 days. And taking that time for yourself is important. And if I had to redo a bit of it, I would take a little more time for myself just to recharge my batteries. I mean, I'm saying the same thing to people in the situation faced with COVID is, you know, be kind and take time to rewind and just calm down. And settle down. It gives you good time. And there's other people that can help you. I did receive some calls during the fires that Sarah's talking about from people about what do we do here and how do I manage this? And there are people you can reach out to for help. Just that ear that someone's been through it, somebody that might be able to shed some light on it. And I think, you know, we reached out to our partners in Prince George. We reached out to many other communities outside our region as well as within the region. But certainly, I think what you really need to remember as leaders and as elected officials is take the time to be kind to yourself and takes the time to get some rest.
Yeah, that really strikes a resonant chord in what we're facing today as a lesson that you've taken from that experience. Thanks for that, Al. Lynn, I was just wondering, as we're moving into now things that you've learned from the experiences you've gone through, you spoke about communication and partnership and coordination. Were those the top things that came out of your experiences?
Yeah, Nicola, they really were. And it's interesting how you go from one crisis to the next. And now that we go, you know, we're having this conversation as a panel, I'm thinking, boy, since early 2017, we've had 2 or 3 crises that we've all had to deal with in some form or fashion. And it really is. It boils down to the communication, the partnerships, and the coordination. And that is really the focus when we deal with any of these crises that we're talking about. So whether it's the wildfires, whether or not it's our opioid crisis, the pandemic, and I would take one of those items out of there, I think, Nicola, just to speak specifically to, and that's the communication. You hear a lot about it. You hear, well, we need to communicate better. We need to communicate this and communicate that. And it's absolutely correct. We need to get the message out at any level, whether it's the provincial or a municipal or a regional district government. Get the messaging out about what's happening in your community. So if we look at the crisis that we're in the middle of today with the pandemic, there's a lot of parallels between it and the impact it's having on our homeless population, our opioid crisis population, and it's communication. It's how do you communicate with the residents of Prince George or other communities about updates and the status of the pandemic and its impact. And I think that's all that people are looking for. So we create that partnership with the Northern Health Authority. We create that partnership with local social service organizations, and we make sure we communicate the information out. But it's difficult. The other thing I would say is one of the lessons that was learned is listen to the experts. But I go back to what Elle said, which was very, very specific about listen to the experts, but they need to listen to us as well. We bring our home-based flavor to the crisis, if you will. We know what our community is all about. We know what impacts our community. We know what our impact and our needs are. So I think it's really important that when you have experts come in, particularly during the wildfires, that there needs to be that two-way communication about what they're after from a professional perspective, but what we need as a local municipality and to help out our residents and the evacuees.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about communication not just being one way.
Mm-hmm.
Laurey-Anne, was there anything, whether it was communication or something else, that really struck you in terms of what you learned from the experience of working with the business community during the COVID crisis?
So, I mean, I would say ditto to pretty much everything these guys have said, because it really, they all tie in together so nicely. But some of the lessons learned from the business hotline is that we have to remember to identify the unique strengths of each of the project team members, because they all bring something different to the table, and recognizing what those strengths are and how you could best make use of them. And also to make sure that you have regular check-ins with your team members, making sure that they're okay, that they're getting the support they need to give to the people they're trying to support. And I mean, and that can go for any of these scenarios that we've talked about today around the table. And the other piece was just making sure that you work with your existing resources. Don't try to create something new that's already out there. And that, you know, is part and parcel of making sure that you have those partnerships, the strength and partnerships that you know you can go to those existing resources. So those are a few of the lessons learned through the business hotline.
Right. Thank you for that. And Sarrah, what about any particular lessons that struck you out of the mill closure crisis and the other ones you've described?
So many lessons learned. I could talk about this for days. I think what's really vital, especially to smaller communities or communities that really rely on industry, is to remember that, you know, we were one of those communities that were too dependent on two different industries, so mining and forestry. And wow, what a difference it makes when all of a sudden your mine is gone and then your forestry is having issues. You know, our sawmill was really impacted with these curtailments and the jobs that are so vital to the community, keep it surviving. So what we learned really is we were forced to, it wasn't necessarily learning, but we were forced to diversify. We were forced to think outside the box and adapt. And I think we all took that role very seriously, and we had to look at other avenues. Four-season tourism, although that's a little bit difficult right now. We can still get out inside in the beautiful weather, but there's skating and fishing and golfing here. So, I mean, we are able to still do those things, and those things are seeing an actual increase. But we had to work on beautification and sell our community as one to save. And those connections, Laurey-Anne hit it, and Mayor Hall hit it too. You know, connections and communication, the connections that I'd made previously were what ended up helping too. So I think that building those connections all the time, you know, when I got the phone call from CIBC that the bank was closing, I called this nice, awesome guy, Dan Wingham from Integris Credit Union. And I said, hey, we're friends. So I said, we need you. What can you do? And they stepped up. I started a food share program. Now we have two awesome grocery stores, I have to say. We have two awesome grocery stores. They're better than the one we had before. We have an awesome Integris Credit Union, which is better than the bank we had before. And we learned how to seek and work with grant funders. We went from getting about average 6 to 8 grants a year to about 22. So, you know, wow. Our community could still move forward and stretch this tax revenue. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, but I could go on for quite a while.
So, Nicola, if I could add
Laurey-Anne,
for
sure.
Just the fact that, you know, when Sarrah said about being able to think outside the box, right? That has been so important, not only from a local government perspective, but from a business perspective. When you look at what businesses are doing to make sure that they can not only survive, but thrive through the pandemic. And it goes for local government too. I think about some of the trails programs that are happening throughout the Cariboo Regional District now. And I think about, you know, thinking outside of not just wood and oil, but being able to use all the other pieces that are around us, and recognizing that that's what we need to do. Not giving up on those essential pieces that we've learned to be, that base, but knowing that we can create something different that allows us to not just depend on one specific area.
And there really is a domino effect to everything we do, and every positive decision, I think, is so valuable and so important in those connections that we've made along the way as local government leaders. Really, when you need somebody, or you need the information, or you need a connection, you can pull it out of your back pocket. And if we listen to the naysayers and quit each time we face adversity, or gave up when it got bad, we would have gotten nowhere in Fraser Lake. And I think most communities probably feel like that.
Al, anything you want to add about lessons learned?
Well, thanks, Nicola. And I think the common theme here, all the speakers have, Lynn's alluded to it, Sarah's alluded to it, Laurey-Anne's alluded to it, is first of all is communications. Communication is key. I would say that things I learned, they need to be frequent, they need to be clear, the messaging needs to be consistent, and a single point that people can go to get that information. And the timing for the information. We started out in 2017 with a fixed time at 11 o'clock. We were going to give the media a briefing, and found out by 11 o'clock our staff just did not manage to have all the information from the other agencies, and we waited for too long to tell the media, and I finally got the courage to tell them, guys, we can't meet till 1:30 because we don't have enough information. And I was surprised that, being open and frank, because I think they could see our frustration from time to time, they said, right on, we'll be there at 1:30. So people do accept the fact that you can't do things necessarily when they would like to have to meet their deadline, that if you want a complete package from us, we just can't give you this at this time. So I think, speaking to the media piece and against communications, you got to be open to the media. You got to be available to the media, and you want to give them complete information. You don't make them guess about things. If they have to guess about things, they'll make up a story. So I found my experience dealing with one of the major news media was Global. They came to the front desk, and of course, they didn't think to get past the door. And I said, well, come on in and have a look at the map. They wanted to go in the EOC. They said, nope, can't go in there. That's not somewhere you can go, but we can talk about the map, talk about what we're doing. And you establish that communication with them so they could come to you and ask you. I said to them, the best thing you can do for us is, when you hear something, it's a rumor, come and let us confirm it. If we can't confirm, or we deny, and if the worst thing you can always say is no comment, because you're already confirming something, you need to be open and transparent, because while they aren't always your friend, they are there to get a story. And if you give them the story, if you give them the information, and they begin to trust you, you build that relationship again, you'll be successful. Also, I think when you make decisions, this is something as leaders we always do. You make decisions based on the best information you have available at the time. If that information changes, correct your actions, communicate it, adjust, and move forward. Don't keep looking back and beating yourself up, because you're only as good as the information you have available at the time. And be sympathetic to the people when you're hearing from them and they're concerned about getting back to normality. They want to return. Show some empathy, and secondly, don't be afraid to reach out for help. Reaching out for help is not a sign of weakness; it's a sign of strength. And there's lots of people out there can help.
Right. Thanks for that. And that's a nice kind of segue into that kind of question of, is what you've gone through still relevant to the COVID pandemic we face today? I know, Laurey-Anne, you were speaking specifically about COVID and that experience, but I'm just wondering, from Sarah and Al's perspective, and Laurey-Anne as well, are there things that you learn in crises that may look kind of different than what we're currently up against in COVID, but are there things you can learn from that and apply to COVID and where we are today? Maybe I'll start with you, Sarah.
Sure. Thanks for that question. Well, I think for our communities to survive, it needs to start with supporting local businesses, and Laurey-Anne has definitely hit on that. And what has been interesting, obviously, with COVID is that many of our businesses and especially the small towns. I don't know how, I would imagine in the large towns and everywhere, people are staying local. They are trying to shop more locally and not travel as much. So the businesses are actually doing better in my community right now. And I think as leaders, we have to remind people and companies to look outside the box, like we talked about earlier, to survive this crazy time. We talked about communication already many times, but it is the key and the most important thing I find in a crisis, especially this long crisis. But, we have people getting a little bitter, a little angry, seeing a little bit more negativity, maybe a lot more in certain cases, but we also have mental health concerns and isolation concerns and other things that are happening that we can't control as elected officials. So what I think I learned with, especially when the fires started and the loss of the mine and rebuilding, we can't control it all and we don't need to. What we need to do as leaders is be calm, offer support, look for solutions and advocate where needed, but sharing that information, using humor when you need it, lighten the mood, and remember that we're all in this together is just very, very important to me and kind of where I've gone, because it tends to be easier to look people in the eye or on Zoom or on Facebook and give them something to focus on that is going to keep them calm and not panicking all the time. And it's just so important that we offer that communication as leaders in a positive light.
Yeah. Al, was there anything that you would see as really different or the same between the wildfire or Mount Poly experience and the COVID?
Well, I think, there is. I think the COVID situation, and Sarah touched on it, Laurey-Anne's touched on it right now, is the mental health situation. We had people both during the Poly spills and the fires of 2017 and 2018 and the ones of 2010 and 2013, for that matter, that we lived through. They needed some mental help. They needed someone to talk to. They needed someone professional, and we see that as an ongoing basis. We just recently had a meeting and tried to determine what to do with some of the COVID money we've been provided by the province. And one proposal came forward saying we need to provide some more mental health, and particularly in the South Cariboo, where we've been lacking in that type of assistance for our children and for adults for years. Hopefully, we're going to put some money towards doing that in partnership with the District 100 Mile to provide those services, because we all see the need that people have. The fact that, again, they need to get some rest, they need to take some time for themselves, but they need someone to talk to, and we need those counseling services available, and that's missing. So that's a common theme throughout them all. I think the other thing you're seeing here with respect to how you go, we're letting, I think most of us are letting the provincial government, the chief medical health officer, handle the situation and be the spokesman and who make the recommendations of what needs to be done. And we need to be supportive of that. We need to help get that information out. But as I cautioned people during the 2017 fires, make sure you provide that information provided you by the agency, but don't put it in your words, because if you put it in your words, you own it. Right now, they own that messaging. You need to make sure that people have that messaging, that they understand that messaging, where they can go to get more of that information if they want. But the moment you put it in your words, it becomes your message, and that's not a good place to be in unless you're a pandemic expert, of which there's many out there today. I understand. I can't believe how many people are experts in pandemics today. We'll take on our chief medical health officer, but I think we need to recognize that we need to be supportive. We certainly should, during Mount Poly, supporting the Ministry of the Environment and quietly asking questions that the community was asking. Back to Lynn's point, we are the community. We know what they're asking. We had the same situation when we asked about COVID information with our recent meeting with IH. Can you get us some more detailed community information? Because that's what the people want to hear. I know it sounds some point to them to be silly, but the people in 100 Mile House and Williams Lake would like more details about their situation rather than hearing about all the major ones. And sometimes, despite saying to people, no news is good news, we need to tell those authorities that you need to tell them something because they're looking for information. So I think those are lessons we can learn that can draw direct parallels, whether it's flooding, whether it's fire, whether it's pandemic, is people need that counseling, that ability for counseling. Hopefully, out of all this, the province will understand the dire need, the dire straits, particularly rural British Columbia, is in accessing that type of care. And it can be done in a variety of ways, through Zoom, for example, some quiet counseling one-on-one. Some people have actually performed better and had better results having that sort of face-to-face, but they're not directly in your face situation. So yeah, those are some things that I think that we can learn and draw parallels to what we're currently going through here today.
Thanks, Al. And just keeping an eye on time, unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of this conversation, but I'd like to close off, if you can think, each of you, about one key piece of advice you'd have for other locally elected leaders facing a crisis in their communities. You've given an incredibly rich array of lessons learned and experiences here today, but just wonder if you can think of what you'd sum up if one of your colleagues or someone from another community was coming to you and say, hey, we're facing a crisis. What can you tell me here? So anybody want to go first?
I have a whole list of them.
Oh, excellent, Laurey-Anne.
Okay,
I knew you'd come prepared.
I'll keep it short.
Absolutely.
I would say make sure you look for key partnerships and that you take advantage of community knowledge. I think that when you do that, then everything else starts to fall into place.
Right. Okay, thank you. Al, how about yourself?
Well, I too have a long list, actually, but, which is unfortunate. But I think I'll go back to one of my key messages was, first of all, you need to support your staff and make sure they get some rest, and more often make sure you get the rest. Do the best, to Sarah's point, don't reinvent. Do the best with the resources you currently have. Don't be afraid to reach out for help. And after your briefings and giving information to the media and to the public, make sure you have time for questions, because quite often what people have to say is more important than what you just said. So take those time. And I'll give you one thing that an RCMP officer said to me in the wee hours of the morning of 2017, when I think it was about day 45. I actually wrote it down, looked it up in my diary yesterday. Keeping notes is handy too. He said, Al, we can manage a crisis. We can't continually manage a crisis. And I think what we see going on here today in Canada and in the world is a situation of continually trying to manage a crisis, and you can't manage people for that long. So we've got some light at the end of the tunnel. Let's move forward and be kind and unwind. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. And Sarah, if I can give you the last remark on this.
Sure. Well, I made a huge list as well, so I'll try. How much time do I got? So
a minute or so.
Talk fast. So I guess my advice would be to make sure you are continually making connections. It doesn't matter what you are, mayor, councillor, director, you never know when it might be needed, as in the case with the Integrity Credit Union coming for aid. Let experts obviously do their jobs, offer support where you can, and I agree 100% with Al, take care of yourself. I'm pretty sure I worked 24 hours a day during the fires and I don't remember sleeping, but no matter what your role is, the most important thing to do is stay positive and calm, and that can be very tough when you see a fire going 15 kilometers down your hillside. But you have to, as a leader, and use facts and positive language as much as possible and communicate continually to the community the things that are important. Don't get into the weeds. And right now, I'll leave it at this. People are inundated with COVID information. So making sure that we are only just putting out accurate, timely information, I think is really important. And telling people that you are working on it. If they're asking questions and you don't have the answer, let them know that you care and you're there for them. And I think I'll leave it at that.
And that's a terrific note to end on, which is an incredibly positive note. And if I've been struck by anything in this panel conversation today, it's how you've gone through such devastating situations in your communities, but the positivity and the note of optimism that has come out of this, I think is really something that people can take from this conversation. So huge thank you to each one of you for your contribution and your thoughts and reflections. And I hope this discussion reminds all local elected leaders that when they're faced with a crisis, others have been there before, others have been in your shoes, and you aren't alone in facing the crisis. So thank you very much. Gabby, back over to you. Hello. Welcome to the panel, and thanks very much for everybody returning and coming to speak to the questions that folks might have, having reflected on what they've just heard about communities moving to recovery, what we've learned from a crisis. And I'm wondering if we can start with a question of that's come in about COVID exhaustion. Coming from the discussion you just had, you talked about continually managing a crisis. Communities are experiencing, and how your communities experience long-term recurring crises of different kinds. What does it take for a locally elected leader to successfully navigate your community's fatigue and your own? Anybody?
Sure, I can start. Obviously, I think in this time we have to lean on each other as elected officials. And I think that's really, really important what we're doing, because we're all feeling burnt out. Take the time to disconnect and spend some time with your family if you can. Communicate. It's something I said earlier. I did say communicate, and building that trust with your community before a crisis hits is normally the best. But if the crisis is hit and you're feeling that you're at a loss or you're burnt out or whatever's happening in your lives, and I know it's happening to all of us, that you just feel down or depressed, I mean, you have to go and get help. You have to take care of yourself. I believe that you have to have a checkup from the neck up. I think that's important to take care of our mental health. And in this day and age, when we really put the emphasis on mental health, I think that we need to make sure we're taking care of that with each other and connecting. We do have a few groups. I know there's a mayor's group that we have in behind the scenes that's for female elected mayors. And, tonight we're meeting and having a get together. So there's little things that you can do to talk to each other and vent. And I think those are things that we all need to do.
Nicola, if I could.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll weigh in, Nicola. I think for me, and really Sarah hits the nail on the head, but it seems to me that since we've been in the panel and started discussion again around things that have taken place, I look back and it seems that since 2017, we've been in some kind of an emergency, whether it's the wildfires, whether it's opioid crisis, whether it's the pandemic. And for me, it really boils down to partnerships. I think that alleviates a tremendous amount of stress and strain off of our shoulders. It's an opportunity for us to share what's going on, to share the dilemma, if you will, and have the ability to connect with your peers, as Sarah says, to be able to talk to other mayors and regional district chairs and representatives throughout your region. It's not healthy, and you don't put yourself in a good position to handle any kind of emergency if you're not sharing that information with your council, with your regional district folks, with your peers from other communities. Even if they're not involved in the emergency, Nicola, I think it's still important to do that. So for me, I would really strengthen those partnerships as hopefully we don't have to go through anything like this again. But I think that's the key for me, is the partnerships.
Yeah. So Nicola, I'll weigh in just a bit. I think that I'd echo what both Lynn and Sarah have said. You need to take time for yourself, but I think you need to also empathize with the people who are feeling frustrated and feel there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Offer some encouragement, but probably tell them, as most of us are feeling, we're feeling the same way, but we have to be positive. We have to be encouraging, and we have to be able to help them if they need help, to suggest where they can go get that help.
So Nicola, if I can throw in my last 2 cents worth on this
Absolutely.
one, I would say ditto to everything I've heard from my colleagues. And I mean, and definitely we're all in that COVID moment right now where we're just kind of going, oh my God, when is this going to be done with? Not only personally, but at the local government level too. And we know, we see it in the community, and as local government, we need to remember we have to lead by example, despite the fact that we're just as exhausted with this COVID thing as everybody else, we still need to remember to lead by example. I mean, I've not had Christmas yet. My kids live in Prince George and just down the road from me. We've not had Christmas yet. We're waiting for that opportunity, you know, when the public health order lifts a little bit, they actually get to have family here. And so I totally feel for my community. And, you know, we just have to reinforce that we're in it together and we'll get through it together.
Great, thank you. We've got another question. You talked about, when you were talking about forest fires and economic downturn and opioids and homelessness and the different crises, COVID as well. You talked a lot as a panel about the commonalities and the common characteristics that you see. But folks are also wondering, is there something that makes COVID fundamentally a different kind of crisis? And if so, how do you deal with those differences? Laurey-Anne, any thoughts?
I think part of why it's fundamentally different is because it's been ongoing. It's not like, you know, it's hit us and then we've been able to work through it and it's done and we rebuild. We're still in the middle of it. And for businesses, that's tough because they don't know what the next public health order is going to be quite often. And, you know, they have to make decisions that are life altering for themselves and for their businesses and for the people who work for them. So I think that's one of the bigger differences for me when I think about COVID in the business community. I know that my other colleagues, you know, having gone through other various crises in their community, I'm sure they have lots to add to that.
So I'll weigh in just a bit, if I could. I think the difference is, you know, with fire, we could see this, people could see the smoke, and certainly the province could experience the smoke of 2017 and many of the other years too, 2018 as well. But I think the difference is you can't see COVID. And for speaking for the interior area, we didn't have a lot of cases, and so people got complacent with it. But I really believe that basically our challenges is that until it impacts them and they see something, we've seen some outbreaks in our local hospital, most recently in Williams Lake. And I think that's brought some of it home to some people because they're in denial. In my personal case, I had an acquaintance that just committed suicide last week as a result of COVID, directly as a result of COVID. His wife is now in the hospital being sedated to keep her calm. So it does, perhaps it's got to be driven home, but it's something you can't see. And it's hard to explain to people, you know, where is this thing? Because they don't know when it's going to come and they don't know where it's going to come from. So it's a tough sled. But I think basically, again, good information and help people get the counseling they may or may not need.
Yeah. Lynn or Sarah, any thoughts on that question?
You know, Nicola, it's and I agree with you know what Laurie and Elle have said. It's that constant cloud, and I think it was very well said when I think it was Elle or Laurie said that you can't see it. When there's a natural disaster, you can see it, but you wake up in the morning and there's something nagging away at you, and then all of a sudden you remember, right, we're a year into COVID. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? There's a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. But I think when we went through the other natural disasters like forest fires and floods and those kinds of things, you almost knew that within 4 or 5 months, you were going to be clear of that and nothing but the remnants to kind of take care of. This is not the same case. And this is continual. And I think the multiplier here is the fact that we're dealing with a homelessness issue, an opioid crisis as well, which we can't seem to get a handle on. So we have two concurring emergencies that we just can't get a handle on, trying our best, and that's taking its toll.
Right. It's hard as you talk about that recurring. It feels like it's a constant, perpetual thing that's going on for people. Yeah. Sarah, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think most of it's been said, really. They've done a great job explaining, but yeah, we don't know when this is going to be over, and that's really what it boils down to. We could see that, you know, summer was coming to an end, fire season would end. flooding season, normally is typically at a different time. And I know that's been happening more in the Caribou during winter, which is not something we normally see either. But, we want this to end. We're hoping the vaccine's going to work and life will go back to normal, but we don't know when that will be. And that's frustrating for most of us.
Yeah.
We want to go back to our normal way of living.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting close to the end of our time, but I think we've got time for one more kind of general question, which I'll ask her around the whole panel. And just reflecting that when you gave your presentations, I was very struck at how, despite the fact you've gone through these recurring crises, there was so much optimism actually that you were expressing. And while we're in the middle of COVID, it's a very tough row right now, but one of the members of the audience has asked whether you see any opportunities actually coming out of this pandemic. And so maybe if we can end on that kind of note of optimism, I'll just ask that question around the table. Are you seeing any opportunities coming out of this pandemic? Anybody want to start?
Well, I'll start. So let's talk about the opportunity, particularly in rural British Columbia. We need broadband. People can't communicate. So perhaps the government officials are listening that we need these facilities and the suppliers, that this isn't just a nice to have. But I think what's come out of the opportunity is the technology that, for example, Zoom that we're using in this case today, right now, has enabled us to communicate where we couldn't have communicated before in the same manner. So I had my grandson's birthday by Zoom. We had Easter dinner with our family, some in Penticton, some in Kamloops, some in 100 Mile House, some in, all over the province, having Easter dinner. And we had Christmas the same way, where we could bring the families together. I have a father, my son's father-in-law is immune compromised, so they were at their house and we had a Zoom dinner. And I think those are the optimistic things that come out of this, new ways of communicating and trying to be realistic about how we can manage this. So out of this, perhaps that's an opportunity. And if you're listening out there, we need broadband.
Nicola, we have strengthened our emergency services department here in Prince George as a result of the 2017 wildfires, and then unfortunately dealt with it in 2018. And ironically, through the strengthening of that department, in a number of ways, how we handle evacuees, how we streamline that process, what would happen if we had to evacuate. I think in doing that review of our own city's emergency services, we were better prepared to handle the start of the pandemic and knowing what pieces had to be in place and those partnerships that had to be developed. So for me, I go back to what I had said earlier about the communication, the partnerships, and the coordination. And I can't agree with Al more about we're doing business differently. And the technology piece and the broadband, those are opportunities, as Al has pointed out, and they're opportunities that we're all working on collectively. So there has been a little bit of good
opportunity. Yeah, opportunities and really the new normal, if to use an overused phrase, seems to be where we are now. Yeah. Laurey-Anne, any thoughts? Or Sarah, go ahead. Sorry.
It's fine. We can share. I was really looking at our community and how we as a community have come together in many, many different ways. It's great to see people out walking and sledding and ice fishing and skating. I mean, people have really gotten better, I would say, at getting outside and doing things. And we're very lucky in rural communities in the north and to be able to have that space to go and navigate the great outdoors the way we do. We're seeing more people writing letters. We're seeing people connect in a different way, kind of like the old days where we used to write letters and now we don't typically as much. But I think we're also doing a better job at taking care of our seniors, and maybe not everywhere, but there's still isolation issues obviously with seniors, but there's isolation issues with everybody. But I'm definitely seeing a lot more provincial funding and a lot more support in place to help our seniors navigate this tough time, and I think all of those components are really important. The funding and whatever else there might be out there for seniors, meals being delivered, groceries being delivered, laundry being done. I mean, there's some great projects and programs that are out there right now. And I will agree with Mayor Hall and Director Richmond that we definitely need that connectivity. I'm having a hard time with connectivity today. I don't know if I'm cutting in and out, but we definitely need to make sure that we are there with the rest of the province and have the best connectivity so we can continue to connect with our loved ones and our communities and things like this.
Right.
So
Thanks, Sarah. And Laurey-Anne, can I give you the last word?
I was going to say, to wrap it up, I would say ditto to everything that I've heard. I mean, we've created opportunities that we've never had before, and we're finding that community organizations and local governments are no longer working in silos. They're actually working as partners. And even if they've been forced to do it, it actually is a good thing, because it starts to allow us to do the things that we really need to do for our communities. And also, you know, we are looking out for each other more. We understand that this whole Zoom thing, you know, we're fatigued from it. We get tired of having to constantly be on call. But we're looking out for each other. You know, it takes nothing to send a quick text to somebody or a quick phone call and say, how's it going? Are you doing okay? Yeah, great. You know, anytime you need to talk to me, please do. So, you know, of all the things that are happening, I think those are the positive pieces.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laurey-Anne, and all members of the panel, Lynn, Al, Sarah. Huge appreciation for all your thoughts and for sharing them with the forum today. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.